Hello, my name is Sandy Fifecoat, and I'll be your host. In this video, we'll be discussing resources, materials, lessons, all aligned to the Common Core. Now, I know this is a really important hot topic for schools today, so I'm really excited that we have an elementary school librarian, Pam Miser from Illinois, as well as a second grade teacher from Utah, Charlotte Armajo. And I'm just really thrilled to have these two actual practitioners who are working with Common Core and resources. So let's jump right into the questions today. How in the world, with so many materials out there, do you all even begin to evaluate these kinds of resources aligned to this new curriculum standard to really be sure that that alignment is there?
I look at it like we go and we take from our state core standards, and any lesson, any book that you have to be with, whatever Reading Street or Holton Mifflin or whatever company you're with, you just look and then you say, okay, where does this align to the language arts core, or what are we going to do? Where am I going to put it? And we also do this program called Professional Learning Communities. So you put online, you can type in Professional Learning Communities, and they speak about our whole school is teaming up, and we put on our menu wall and the subject, then the objectives, and what we're going to teach, and then we do it in a kid-friendly. It's kind of like we make a grid on our whiteboard, and then we write down, like if it's reading, and then it's one of the top skills that objectives that we're working on, and then the next one, we do it kid-friendly, and then the next one after that, we write down what they're going to work on through the day. It's all with this professional learning communities that they call it the PLC in our school. So whatever books you're working with, you go to the core, you go to the Common Core, you open up your Reading Language Arts Common Core, and you align it with what they're saying. Okay, where does this cover? If it's not covered on there, we try and make sure it is. Whatever we teach should have a standard that we're teaching under.
So that's really interesting that your school actually is investing in technology to sort of help with that alignment. Pam, as a librarian, what can you add to this whole notion of evaluating resources?
Definitely, as a librarian, evaluating resources is a huge part of my job. And, of course, my criteria for quality resources differs depending on which type of resource I'm looking at. It could range from magazines, websites, fiction, nonfiction, databases, and depending on which one of those resources, I'll have slightly different criteria. For example, if I were looking at some nonfiction resources, it's always best if I can get a copy of the book to look at before I purchase it, but unfortunately I can't always afford to do that. But I'll be looking for things like accuracy of the text, the depth of the text in terms of how much detail it gets into, or is it just a very cursory covering of a topic. I look at the organization of the text. I want to vary that, so there may be some texts that are in order chronologically. There may be texts, for example, like a narrative nonfiction, or there might be ones that are organized question-answer by major topics. I always look at the introduction and the conclusion of the book. I'm really astonished at how many nonfiction titles have absolutely no conclusion. They'll have a nice introduction and they cover all these topics, and then I turn the page and there's the index. The book is over. So I like to look for books that have conclusions and, of course, helpful and meaningful text features. So if there's label diagrams, if there's captions, graphics, that they're meaningful and they make sense and they actually add to the text as opposed to being distracting or not useful. As far as fiction books go, I try to use professional journals to help me make those decisions because, again, I can read as many books as I possibly can from my public library and still not read everything that comes out. So I will look to School Library Journal or the Horn Book or my fellow librarians, and they'll often say, oh, you got to check out this book. It's really great. And then either I'll purchase it and read it once it gets here and then be able to recommend it, or sometimes I'll be able to read it ahead of time before I purchase it.
One of the things that I'm really curious about, too, is I know that there's a heavy focus on nonfiction in the core standards as one example of a big shift in this set of national standards. So I'm curious, are there specific resources that you plan on either acquiring or integrating into your school library or making available to the teachers and the students in your school that are specific to meet these new standards? And if so, what process did you use to locate those?
That's a great question. As a librarian, I help to gather a lot of resources, a variety of resources to help out the classroom teacher. So generally it will start with myself sitting down with the classroom teacher or generally a team, finding out what their goal is. And usually there's some sort of content involved, not always, but say they were studying a pond habitat. I find out about databases that will help them. I will go online and search websites that would be appropriate and then gather books from my library or other libraries in my district and put those all together for the teachers. What I found to be very helpful is creating what used to be called a Pathfinder in the library industry, and it used to be on paper, and it would be a listing of all the resources. Well, now we do those electronically. I use a product called LibGuides, but you could also do something like LiveBinder or just your school's webpage and create a list of resources that the teachers and the students can contact. But some of the great databases that we've used are BrainPop that has nonfiction content. We love another database called PebbleGo, which has all kinds of information about animals. We use Power Kids Life Science, and it's always good to have electronic encyclopedia. And there's another great resource called NetTrekker, and what NetTrekker does is it searches, and they have teachers that evaluate websites and kind of rate them in terms of easier to read or harder to read to help out teachers. Unfortunately, a lot of those items do cost money and have to be purchased by your school district or your school. So that's a little unfortunate, but if your school can afford those kinds of things, they're incredibly helpful, and it's a very engaging way to get the students involved with more nonfiction reading.
Super. Let's take that same question over to Charlotte. Charlotte, are there specific resources you plan on using this year?
Now, currently this year, I'm working with, and I'm going to push this because I just fell in love with it for second grade. When you talk about the Daily 5, have you ever heard of that?
No.
Absolutely.
And it's with, they call them the two sisters, Gail, I hope I pronounce her name right, Bushy, and Joan Moser, M-O-S-C-R. Mm-hmm. And I started the Daily 5 last year, and it focuses on good fit books, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. They have to be able to read them at their grade level. So our librarian, makes sure they have books that are at their grade level. No matter what we're studying, she tries to make sure she has enough to offer my students that are definitely at their grade level that they can take back and read in the classroom.
Great suggestions. Let's talk a little bit about best practices. Let's start, Charlotte, with you. How do you find is the best way to really work with other teachers or get yourself organized to create your own lesson plans that meet the new course standards?
Basically, everything that we meet as a team for 90 minutes, and we break out our core standards, that we're working with math or language arts and what we're focusing on, and then we pull together as a team what we're going to use, and usually it should come from our reading series that we have. We use Scott Forsman reading streets, and so we try and pull everything that we can from there that we're going to focus on so that all the teachers are basically doing the same thing in each classroom and focusing on the main objective and the goals, and it seems to, inspire us to, that didn't work, that worked. How can we make the students more active in their learning? And as we follow our menu walls, we have that up there that the students they're the ones that are becoming more responsible for their learning in a sense because they know what we are teaching, they know what we're expecting. I hope I'm answering that.
I think those are two really important points. First of all, one of the benefits of the Common Core, of course, is the collaboration opportunity it affords educators working together to plan and sort of distribute the workload and not work in isolation professionally. And I think the second objective is the one you alluded to as well, Charlotte, which is all about declaring to the students what they're learning that day and getting them responsible for their own learning. They understand the objectives that you're trying to cover that day as well. So two really big benefits of a Common Core curriculum. Pam, do you have anything to add to that in terms of how lessons are actually developed cooperatively in the school?
Well, I would certainly agree with Charlotte that often our colleagues are our most important resource. Knowing the Common Core standards well and having them handy. I even found that there's an app you can download to your iPhone that has the Common Core standards. So if you're happen to be away from a computer and in a lesson planning mood, you can pull those standards down without a problem, and working together to come up with plans or lessons that are going to fit in with what you're studying. Another thing that our school and our district does, which I think is incredibly valuable, is we study a lot of professional books. So our assistant superintendents and our principals and our reading specialists and the committees that help to write our curriculum, they will have some really foundation type professional books that they feel like the entire staff could benefit from. And then we'll study those books for over a year even, maybe at one staff meeting a month, and really go into those professional books in depth. And we will plan with our grade levels and across grade levels on how to implement some of those things that we've read about into our own classrooms. I really think that sometimes you might think, oh, a professional book, they're very heady, they have a lot of theory, but a lot of the books I'm finding really do have some very specific hints in terms of how to implement that in your classroom. Two other things I wanted to mention. Again, these are not free resources, which is unfortunate, but I highly recommend Lucy Calkins has written some curricular calendars that can be purchased that help to show month by month different lessons and standards that classroom teachers can use. And another great resource that we're using at our school, which is also from Lucy Calkins and some other people too, is called Units of Study for Teaching Reading, Grades 3 through 5. And that's also by Kathleen Tolan. So Units of Study for Teaching Reading, Grades 3 through 5. And that really breaks down fiction, nonfiction, interpretation, synthesizing. And so a lot of times teachers will sit down with one of those and use what they find in those texts to apply to their own classrooms.
Great suggestions from both of you. Thank you so much. I know this is going to be really helpful for teachers trying to get their arms around this new Common Core curriculum. It's definitely both, I think, an opportunity as well as a challenge, but I think at the end of the day, teachers talking to one another the way you all have today is what's really going to make a difference. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's podcast. Charlotte and Pam, thank you again so much for all the information you have shared with our audience. We hope that you'll stay tuned for our top 3 you should know facts about the Common Core, and we would love to hear from our audience as well. You can email us at whatcasts@weareteachers.com with any thoughts or feedback and suggest topics that you might like to see us cover in the future. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.